Okay, great. So I've put together a demo application just so I can kind of show some scenarios in the application and some typical vulnerabilities and how to look for them. So this is a Django application that I've put together. Really simple. It doesn't do much. It has a list of products and it shows you the prices. And if you're an administrator, you can log into the super secret admin page. And in the backend, you can do a bulk upload of products using YAML, and you can increase prices by an arbitrary percentage. So if there's an inflation and you wanted to go and put 5% increase on everything, you can do that in the backend. So doesn't do a great deal. This demo is Django because it's quite a visual thing we can demo, but it could be absolutely anything. This could be a API that you're writing. It could be a Flask application. It could be a Jupyter notebook that you're developing. I've just picked Django as an example, but everything I'll show you is not specific to Django unless I call out otherwise. So in the application, there's a few views, and I've left some security vulnerabilities dotted around the application. And I'm going to show you how the plugin will help us write those. But first things first, let's get it installed. So if you go to Preferences in PyCharm and open up the plugins page, then you'll need to search for Python security. And this one here, with the one with the snake and the keys, is the plugin you're looking for. So install that plugin. Once you've done so, it will ask you to restart the IDE. It's actually quite good that it does that, because when you restart the IDE, it's going to come up with all of these messages potentially on your application. So one of the first features I put into the plugin was something to basically look at which packages you have installed inside your project. So within PyCharm, you've got the ability to look at your project interpreter and typically have a virtual environment configured. And in your virtual environment, you've got packages installed, which you could have done using pip or using a requirements file or pipenv or one of those tools. And in here, you've got a list of packages which are installed, and they will have specific versions. If you want to go and open that up, I'm sure there is at least one package which has got an upgrade available to it. Often, especially with some of the bigger frameworks, you don't typically go and blindly update everything, because sometimes there aren't backward incompatible changes to APIs and things like that. So what happens is people tend to pin specific versions. They write against those versions, they test them, and they deploy them into production. So that's a pretty common use case. There's been some research on Django in particular. The vast majority of deployments of Django have the specific version pinned. Now, why is this a slight challenge? Well, when the plugin starts, when it opens the project, it will go and look at all of the packages you have installed on the specific version, and then it will look up against an index to see if there's any security vulnerabilities that have been publicly disclosed against those packages. So my application has a few actually, which is worrying. The Django REST framework, which I had installed, the version that I had has a security issue. The versions of Django that I had installed had 3 separate CVEs. I did actually go and pick a slightly older version just to demo this, but the Django team are pretty hot on managing security concerns, so it's not uncommon to see CVEs raised against web frameworks. So what you can do is, when it starts up, it will give you this notification. If you missed it, you can go and run it again by going to the tools window and then doing check Python package security, and it will run the check again. If you upgraded any packages or changed anything in the environment, then you can just go and kick off that workflow again by doing check Python package security, and it will come up with those notifications there. And then in the PyCharm event log, you can then go and see the messages and dig into any details. If any of them have a CVE, which is like the global database of security vulnerabilities, you can click on the CVE and it'll open that up in a browser, and you can find out specific details about that CVE and what it is. I'm going to pause there. Is there any questions, Paul?
Sorry, I was on mute while I was typing. Someone trolled me and asked me if this thing was being recorded and then gave me an LOL.
Is it being
Well
recorded?
played. Well played, Edwin. Well played. Okay, there's a question. I know the answer to it, but I'll go ahead and ask it and let you promote that you're going to talk about it. Is there any way for this stuff to be run outside of PyCharm, for example, in a continuous integration environment?
We will definitely get there. And the answer is
I
yes,
described it
and we will
in
definitely get there, yeah.
What's that? Say that again?
We'll definitely get there, and yes is the answer.
Yes, it's freaky, it's cool, it's very provocative. Okay, let's see, next one. What were some things you added since you started the plugin, and or what kinds of things do you want to add after that you still want to add?
So I've been going through and adding more and more checks for different situations. That's been the thing I've mostly started since I added the plugin, is more and more checks, and also fine-tuning the checks, which I'll talk about in a second. Things I want to add now, once the plugin, so the plugin's basically got to the point where I've covered off vast majority of sort of Python typical security vulnerabilities. Things that I'd like to add next would be more cryptography inspections, which is quite niche. And then I'd start to look into web application security in particular, and how to do things like fuzz testing, which is very hard to do statically, so just looking at the code. But because you can run your environment in PyCharm and you can also look at the code at the same time, I think it's a unique position to actually be able to do what's called DAST, dynamic application security testing. And I'm pretty sure the plugin could pull that off, but I haven't tried it yet.
Okay, next one is a little bit related to what you were just describing. Is Python itself harder or easier to check for security vulnerabilities?
That's a good question. It's actually quite hard to check for security vulnerabilities. So there's basically two types of ways to look at an application and determine security vulnerabilities. There's static code analysis and dynamic analysis. Static analysis is where you literally just read the code and you say, okay, that's probably an issue, and you can automate these things. But the challenge with Python is that it's a weakly typed language, which is a blessing and a curse at the same time, because it's very difficult to make assumptions in Python. You don't know necessarily what type of variable is, how it's been handled, where it's come from. So when you compare that against other languages like Java, for example, it's actually quite straightforward to do static code analysis in Java, because you can do it almost like at compile time. You know exactly what type everything is, how it's been handled. Whereas with Python, you have to make assumptions about where that variable has come from and how it's been used. One thing that I've learned whilst writing this plugin is that PyCharm itself actually does a lot of that for you. So when you're writing code in PyCharm, it knows, it's implied what types you're working with, which is how the autocomplete works. So this plugin actually takes a lot of benefit of that. So it actually uses PyCharm's knowledge of the code, the libraries, the stubs, everything. It basically uses that knowledge to make sure that the code analysis that it's doing is a bit more accurate. And that's probably one of the big differences between this plugin and other static code analysis tools for Python, is that the number of what we call false positives, which is situations where it raises an alert, but it's actually wrong. The tool's actually wrong, it's actually fine. I've tried to reduce those as much as possible, because I've used so many code analysis tools that give you thousands of warnings and thousands of notifications, and 80–90% of them are invalid. So the goal, I think, with the plugin is that I've kind of really tried to finely tune the false positives in particular, so that it's very specific about stuff that it raises an alert for, so that you can actually treat it seriously. Whereas if you open this thing up for the first time and it gave you 5,000 issues in your code, you're not going to know where to start. and you might just close the plugin and pretend you didn't install it in the first place.
It's like a project where most of the tests fail. Everyone stops caring about tests.
Yeah, exactly.
We have 2 more questions. I will save them and just comment on this point that you just made, that PyCharm does type analysis. Little tip, you can go up to a variable in PyCharm and on Mac OS command hover over it, and we will pop up a little dialog telling you what we think its type is. And that's kind of independent of type annotations or MyPy or anything like that. Go ahead and continue, and we'll take those next 2 questions later.
Okay, cool. So now that I've got the plugin installed, first thing is that it's looked at my environment and it's made some comments about the packages I have installed, which is great. So I can fix that myself. I can go and upgrade the packages. I can go and look at the specific versions that I'm using, read some information about that. That's great. However, in my application, I've inherently designed a few things which are going to cause security problems. So the way the plugin works is it integrates fully into the PyCharm editor. So for example, if I go and open up my Django settings file, it's got a nice yellow warning over this thing which already says security warning. However, research shows that the majority of Django servers deployed with this enabled anyway, is the debug mode is on. Now, why is debug mode on a bad thing in Django? Anytime Django crashes, it gives you a load of information about your environment, what you've got running, the database, the versions, the software, which an attacker could use to figure out exactly, oh, they're running this version of Django, and they could possibly go and look at the same database that I have to do that package scan and go, oh, they're vulnerable to this thing, and then attack you that way. However, debug mode is really useful. So you wouldn't turn it off on your development environment, but I'm going to raise the warning anyway. So this is an example of how the plugin gives you insights during your code. These are the same as you would with any other code insight in PyCharm. They're fully integrated. If you edit the code and you change the property, the warning will go away automatically. You don't need to dismiss it. And literally as you're writing, it will give you that insight. All of the checks that are put into the plugin have a number or a code. This just helps really you reference with your team specific issues you found, and also in the documentation, then it helps you reference exactly like the details behind those checks. This one in particular is just called DJG100. It's one of the first Django, and it's the most commonly found Django one. If you do on the dots show inspection description, it will actually give you the information about this particular warning, how it works, some examples, and some justification behind it as well. So later on, I'm going to show you how to use the inspection tool to scan a whole project. So I don't expect you to go through every file one at a time looking for these yellow pop-ups. But this is basically like the in-editor warnings that you'll get against any of the checks in the tool. It's found something else as well in this middleware section. I never really know what's going on with the Django middleware list. It's just a bunch of random namespaces, but I've somehow managed to miss something, which is giving me a warning about. So I'm going to go and add whatever it thinks I'm missing, which you can do using the quick action, and it goes and adds the CSRF view middleware, which I must have deleted when I was doing the demo, and it goes and adds that for me automatically. So that's another big feature of this plugin, is that a number of the checks have got quick fixes available for them. So a quick fix is something that on a Mac is option return. I don't know what it is on Windows. Probably Alt or Control return. Do you know, Paul?
You are correct.
Okay, cool. So if you get that notification, and here it's got a little light bulb that showed up, and it's giving you a quick fix, then actually what I've done is not only suggest and tell you that you've made a mistake and there's a potential security vulnerability, but actually give you a really quick way out of that. Basically replace that with something that I am absolutely certain will fix the issue. not all of the checks have got quick fixes because some things need a bit more, thought and diagnosis. And I don't want to just blindly add code into your project if it's going to cause problems. But for cases where I'm absolutely certain that there's a simple quick fix to that security vulnerability, then that will be built into the plugin as a quick fix that you can just smash it on the keyboard. So that's the first two checks that I wanted to show. Any questions?
Got some good questions. How does the plugin receive all the security checks? Can we see the list of checks somewhere?
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I'll go through the documentation soon. There is, actually, I can quickly show that now. We will go through the inspection a bit later, but the list of checks is built into the inspections window. So you can get to that either from code inspections, or if you right click on a folder or something. So if you wanted to inspect a particular folder, for example, you can do right click and inspect code. And inside here, there's the inspection profile. If you click on those dots, you'll actually see all of the inspections for everything you've got installed. I've got a lot of stuff disabled because I'm going to do a demo of this in a bit, but all of the inspections that are built into this plugin are listed in here, as well as the documentation built into the description window. Some of these checks have got multiple ways that they can be triggered. So I think there's about 40 inspections built into it, but some of them have got up to about 20 scenarios. So I think in total it probably covers off about 150 different scenarios in the plugin, but you can see a full list in here. And also on the website, you can see a full list of checks broken down into a particular technology area. And also, like in the documentation, I've got examples and references to the documentation, any other further reading, if you really want to get nerdy and stuck into, how some of these things work.
Okay, next one is a small one. I think your screen proves the answer to this. Does the plugin work on Mac? Tried installing it, says it's incompatible with PyCharm Pro 2019.3.1. So that's just one for him to report a bug in the issue tracker, right?
Yeah, definitely. 20.
Most
I'm not sure about
likely
that
a
specific
text log
version.
or something.
Yeah, I'm running 2020.1 EAPs. This is the latest version. I've tested against 2019.3.2 and 3.3. It does actually say in the plugin which version it's compatible with. So if it's not, you can see in the marketplace which specific versions it is compatible with.
Right.
But it uses some APIs which are in the newer versions of PyCharm. So that might be one reason.
Got it.
Definitely works on Mac.
So the next one's kind of fun. Can you integrate the security checks into PyTest runs or via Tox?
Oh, that's an interesting question. I don't know. I have not tried to do that. It's the short answer. Yeah, that's the short answer. You could do it as a profile in PyCharm, but running it via PyTest, no, is the answer probably. I don't think you could do that.
Yeah.
You could do it as a command line thing in Tox. But when I show you the command line version of this and how it works, it uses Docker, so that's going to be a pretty slow Tox script, and it's much quicker to do it in the inspection tool.
Okay, this one is fun because it's a little bit, not theory or practice, some combination of the two. From Dirk, when multiple major versions of a package receive a security update, does the plugin realize it if you're on the lower version but did a major update? For example, I'm on package 1.4.5, contains all the security fixes, but there's a fix in version 2.0.2. I don't want to upgrade to 2.x. How does the plugin know?
Okay, so this is to do with version ranges. So this is actually something built into PyCharm that I've utilized. The way that it does dependency resolution. So if you've got a requirements.txt and you've got basically these requirement specifiers, You know, if you were to do something like I want less than equal to this version, but I also want greater than version 1.0.0, for example. Like this is a version range specifier that you can use. The security database also uses version range specifiers. So if it knows, for example, there's a security vulnerability in a specific version of Django, it will know the range of versions that impact that. Because it's not always the old versions. Sometimes only the new version's been impacted and the old version hasn't. So it does actually know that by the version ranges in the security warnings, and it will resolve that when it does the inspection.
All right, great. We have one more question, but I'll save it for the next section so you can get back.
Okay, cool. So I'm now going to show you the code inspection tool. So I've showed you a couple of things that potentially could be issues. I could show you how to fix this issue, but I don't want to spend all my time showing Django development. But let's go into the code inspection now. So we can do this a number of ways. The code inspection tool in Python, PyCharm, sorry, you can either do it on the project view, so you can right-click on a particular directory and do inspect code, or you can do a profile from the code menu. If you go to code and then inspect code, you can pick your inspection scope. PyCharm's got a whole bunch of different ways of customizing this. You can say whole project, only things that I haven't committed, which is pretty cool, which is the change list, or you can say this particular file, or you can go and say, I only want to look at project files, for example. So I'm going to do just the project files. And then in the inspection profile, there are two, there's project default and default. So in here, I'm going to go and deselect everything, and then I'm going to get onto Python security and select just that section. The reason is if I go and tick everything, I'm going to get a few thousand warnings, and I'm not really interested in TypeScript warnings in this particular demo. There's something else I do want to show as well, which is that when you go into here, this is also the view that you manage the severity of particular issues. So for example, if you think that use of the built-in exec function for anything other than a string literal is not a warning, it should be absolutely an error, then you can apply that severity to your project inspection, or you can apply it to a specific scope. So you could say, for example, you know, this particular directory or anything in the change list, you can pick on how you do that. So I'm going to go and leave that as it is, and I'm going to go and run my inspections. So I go OK, and then continue. So it's just completed, it's done, it's inspected my project and given me some insights. So first thing you might notice is how fast that was. One of the benefits of the tool using the PyCharm APIs is that it uses multiple threads. It's cached a lot of the information in the index in PyCharm. So it's really quick at doing these static inspections. One thing I wanted to make sure is that it could do the analysis very quickly, so it didn't interrupt your development workflow too much. And then they're broken down into different areas. If you've never used the inspection profile before, you can group by severity. So if you just want to ignore the weak warnings for now and just focus on the warnings, then we can have a look to see which ones we have. Django debug mode, we've already talked about. And in the window, you can look at occurrences of that. So as you navigate, you can see, okay, this particular file has that one warning. If you go and double click on that, then it will take you to that line in the application, or it gives you a preview on the right-hand side. So this is really cool just to kind of flick through warnings that you might have found in your code. And I'm going to show you a couple of these in a second. And you can look at those, see whether or not they're an issue. And okay, this one looks worrying, and I'll show you how that works in a second. The quick fixes, you can also apply from the inspection view. So you can apply the quick fix here. You can also do batch fixes, which is really cool. So if you're super confident in this quick fix and you're happy to apply it across the entire project, you can actually apply that batch fix from this view. So it will actually go and if my plugin has said, I can safely fix this for you, you can just go and do that across the entire project without having to do it one line at a time, which would get infuriating. Also, in the inspection mode, you can suppress for a statement or a function, which would normally add like a code comment in there. So if you've looked at it and you're absolutely certain that this isn't a problem, and you don't want this to ever appear again, you can basically suppress that particular issue. Both of the ones it's found in here are issues, and I'll explain why in a second. So this is basically the code inspection tool and how it works. You can also export inspection results. And one other thing is that once you've kind of customized your inspection profile and you've said, okay, this is what we want to look for, I've got this as a project. And what I can do is I can go back into this window and do export. And I can call it security. And the PyCharm, where is it? Webinar. I can save it in here if I want to go and put it on a team folder or something. Alternatively, you can copy that to the IDE so it's available for all of your projects. But at the moment, that is stored in the project directory. You can actually go and check those into Git as well if you want to share the same inspection profile amongst other people in the team. So I'll stop there for questions.
Here's a good one. This they put on your thinking cap. How do so context processors that return dictionaries merged into a template context, is that secure? So I'll reread that. You got a context processor, context under processors. Yep. Got a dictionary that's being sent over to a template, the context for the template. Should that be flagged?
There's a couple of scenarios where it should be flagged, which this could pick up on. So the context dictionary, so this is Django-specific.
Yep.
So in a context dictionary, you can merge keys with other places. Django actually like the cross-site scripting, which is called, what's the middleware?
Middleware, the last one.
Yeah. So there's the CSRF middleware. There's the the Octave options one, and there's another one as well, which basically knows in the context which things potentially are safe and which things aren't safe. And it does that so that you can mark some things as known safe. One problem with merging with another dictionary is you might not have full control over that. I do actually have a demo of that in one of these files, which I'll jump to next.
All right, so go ahead and continue. That's the last question we have in the queue right now.
Okay, cool. So let me show you my demo app. I put this together last night. So it's pretty straightforward, but we've got some basically a typical Django application. It's got an admin. The default, oh, it's not running. That would help. Okay, it's got the default Django admin backend, and I've created a couple of models. A model called products, which has got some products in it, and I've just created a few example ones, and it's got one called temporary users, which I haven't actually used yet, and inside the application, on the main page, it will do a view to render the products and tell people what is available to purchase. And in here, it's going to show you like a promotion of the week. And at the bottom, I've also got another thing, which is like a super secret admin page, which I want to be available to other people who work for the company. So the way that I've done that is pretty typical. I've got a view. a home view. I'm just getting all products from the database. I've got a promotion, and I'm getting all promotions from the database. And also, I'm rendering the promotion because the marketing team spoke to me and they said, we don't want just to be able to write text here. We want to put other things like, bold and pictures and, marquee tags and all sorts of fun stuff. So we've enabled this thing which you might have Googled and found on Stack Overflow. There's a function you can import called mark safe, and it doesn't escape things when they go through in the context dictionary. This is actually referring a little bit to that question before. So I'm sending that on to here, and then when I'm rendering that in the view, then it's going to show the promotion. Why is that an issue, and why has it underlined it? So it's a weak warning because I've configured it that way in my environment. But what Django says is that if you use mark safe like this, you're basically bypassing the cross-site scripting protection that's built into Django. So if somebody evil in the marketing team wanting to put something other than marquee tags in there, then I'm never going to know, and I'm never going to be protected against it. So this is an example of a weak warning style and stuff that's very specific to Django and is typically not covered in other static code analysis tools. So in particular, I've looked at Django applications and all the Django security recommendations and built them into the product, which is why I'm demoing a Django application. Something else that it's going to pick up is on the next screen. So that's basically showing the issue. If, like I said before, if you go to inspection description, it will tell you why I'm saying that's an issue, and it will give you some examples, and it'll actually tell you what you should be using instead. This one doesn't have a quick fix because if I took that tag away, it's probably going to break the site and it's going to break functionality. If you're trying to create HTML from the tag, you should use format HTML. In this case, it's probably okay because the marketing team shouldn't be adding any malicious tags as long as we've got full control over who's got access to the backend. So how does this super secret admin page work? It basically says the request, which I pass through in the context, user is staff. If they're staff, see the super secret admin page, otherwise they can't see that. So that's my very weak protection for my admin backend. And then I've got a separate view for the admin users. And I've got 3 vulnerabilities that my plugin has picked up in this one file, just to show you as demonstrations. All 3 of these would not typically be brought up by a static code analysis tool. This one would because it's a really well-known one, but the others probably less so. Okay, so my admin homepage, just in case somebody else managed to figure out what the URL is, I'm just going to assert that the request user is staff. So like if somebody just clicked on it, went to the URL, then that should fail, right? Well, actually, it's highlighting this as a security vulnerability because assert statement should not be used for anything other than PyTest or debugging. There's this very specific case for this. So in Python, if you run with the -O flag, it's in something called optimize mode. When you run Python with optimize mode, basically it just ignores all assert statements. Optimize mode is typically used in production environments in particular. And when you're developing against this, you could have written a test, you could have tried this yourself. You'd be happy that, if I try and get to this page and I'm not a user that's staff, that it works, it throws an error. But when you deploy to production, somebody ran it with optimize mode, and this statement literally just disappears. It does nothing. So that's why I'm flagging this as a warning, is because you shouldn't be doing this. And if you deploy this into production, basically everybody can go into the admin backend. So that's something I wanted to demo. The second thing I wanted to demo is YAML because it's the 9th most popular Python package, PyYAML, and it's not security vulnerability, it's definitely documented. But basically, when you're loading input from YAML, you can do some pretty funky things. So in my app, people wanted the ability to bulk upload products into the database. So, they could basically, I've got some I prepared earlier. They could paste some YAML in here. And like, if we wanted to put some handbags in here or eggs or something, people didn't want the ability to just have to go and sit and add them one at a time. So we thought YAML was a pretty easy format. We could have used XML, we could have used JSON, but when you go and use upload, it's going to go through a standard Django form, where is it? Which goes to this bulk upload page. It's going to look at the form, it's going to validate it, it's going to do clean data, and it's going to get the input field and pass it through YAML load. And then for each product that it finds, it's going to add a product to the database. So if I go and do upload, ta-da, it's done. So it's added handbags and eggs. And now the page looks weird. Like I said, I wrote it last night. So what could go wrong here? And the answer is on the documentation. So if on the documentation for the plugin, there is a list of checks. And if you go and look at the YAML one, which is okay, so it says that the YAML load, the default behavior, allows you to apply these special symbols so that you can do interesting things. One of those is Python object apply, which sounds odd, like why would you need to do that? But basically, you can put the name of a function in Python or anything in the standard library and some arguments, and PyYAML will basically run that for you. So if I copy this snippet, I don't recommend doing this in production, and I probably shouldn't have put it on the website, but I wrote a quick YAML file which will basically open up what's something called a reverse shell on your machine, which basically a hacker would use to just log into your machine over port 1234. My machine is pretty locked down, so this isn't going to work. It's going to give a permission issue. But if this is running on a Linux production environment, this would absolutely 100% work. So now I'm uploading this YAML file, supposedly, and actually it's trying to start a reverse shell. So it's basically opening up my shell to the internet, which is not great. So the plugin has picked that up. This one has a quick fix, so I can just go and apply that, and it's going to go and make sure that it's using the safe load function and that doesn't happen in future. So I'm going to pause there for questions.
We have one question, which is it's a good question, both from security practice, but also how the plugin works. Mm-hmm. How do new security issues proceed to the plugin? Do we need to update the plugin regularly?
That's a good question. So at the moment, the checks, the security issues are compiled into the plugin. It doesn't. So I've been really careful here. I don't want the plugin to reach out to the internet for anything, to either share your code, to look at things, to look at an index server. So in its default mode, everything is bundled in the plugin. The side effect of that, the downside, I guess, is that you do have to update the plugin when there are new security checks and stuff like that that have been published. But the design is to basically make sure that there's no information leaked by the plugin. There's no like privacy issues with the plugin. So the package scan, for example, uses a bundled version, a bundled database that comes with the plugin. If you go to the the settings for the plugin, it will use the bundled safety DB. If you wanted to use a live version from GitHub or you had your own copy somewhere, you can go and do that, but it's not the default configuration. If you do that, it doesn't share any information about the packages that you've got installed. It literally just grabs that URL, caches it, and then runs everything offline. The same with the checks. The checks are all bundled into the plugin, and they're all managed within PyCharm. So yeah, it means you need to patch the plugin every now and again, but PyCharm is pretty good. It does tell you when there's new updates available, and it gives you a notification. And this plugin does support upgrading without restart, but I have yet to see that work.
All right. Just explain to people what that means.
So
newer versions of IntelliJ IDEA plugins have this new mode.
Yeah, so in the newer versions, there's basically a mode where you can update your plugins, and you don't need to restart the IDE. So it does support it, but yeah, absolutely new versions of IntelliJ IDEs.
And it requires the plugin to be written in a certain way.
Yes, it does.
That preference that you showed about getting the safety DB from GitHub, is that a one-time only thing? You go to the preference pane, it downloads, or is it periodically look there, or what?
It'll fetch it every time it scans for every time you run the check package security, it will go and fetch that.
All right.
Yep.
Okay.
So if that's a live feed or something, or your team wanted to maintain your own version, then yeah, it would fetch that every time you run the check.
Okay, that was the only question that was left.
Okay, and then one more I wanted to show was this one, which is a SQL injection flaw for Django, which is well documented on the Django website, but is a great example, I guess, of where this is using product-specific issues. So in this case, I'm running a raw query. It's kind of obvious where the SQL injection is, but if I actually go and take out those quotes, it disappears, because that's how Django's parameterization and SQL injection protection works. It basically works really well unless you put quotes around the string, and it does document that. It does tell you not to do that, but this is basically how the inspection works. Other code analysis tools would just raise an issue about the fact that you've used raw, or if they see it at all. Whereas this will actually look at the string and actually look at whether you've done and followed things exactly as per the documentation. So that's the end of the checks. I wanted to show a few other things whilst we've got a bit of time. So in the documentation, like I said, there's a list of checks broken down into areas. There's general stuff that people can fall into. There's things like people who've hard-coded passwords into files. So this is pretty cool if you want to do a code review and somebody has done something like this. Then it's going to go and raise a big issue on that one, because you shouldn't do that. If you want to go and scan like a big project or something, you can also do it. Encryption, and also SSL in particular, digging into some other things you can do there. So yeah, there's a lot of interesting checks if you want to have a look at. I'm adding new ones all the time. But now I wanted to share something really cool. So this is great, and it runs within your IDE, but typically you're not the only person working on a project. So somebody had the question, does this run in CI/CD? So what I did to get that working was, well, first of all, the plugin requires PyCharm, which is one constraint. So what I've done is basically built a Docker image called PyCharm Security, which is available on the Docker Hub. The Docker image basically has a headless installation of PyCharm bundled into it, as well as all the dependencies needed to run the plugin in headless mode. And headless mode means you can basically run it as a command line utility. And because it's a Docker image, You don't need to worry about installing anything, configuring anything, going through all that automation and stuff like that. You can literally just pull this Docker image and give it a folder and run it, and it will give you a list of all the outputs. So I'm going to do that on a project that I had ready open. So this is a project I work on as well called Wiley, and I've got the Docker image pulled already. So you run the Docker image and you do something called a volume mount, which if you use Docker a lot, you'll know what that is. But basically it means make this particular directory available to, that's not going to work that well. Make this directory available to my image under this path. It will look for anything in the path /code and it will scan it basically and give you an output of anything that it finds. So if I scan my project using Docker, I am running PyCharm, but I don't need to have PyCharm installed. This is running fully inside a Docker image, and it will go and give a output saying all of the things that it's found. So it's found some weak warnings, it's found some crypto bugs, and some other things that I should generally be alarmed about. So it's going to give you the output just in the console. If you wanted to run this on CI/CD in your own private environment, like I said before, this is one of the reasons why I've bundled everything into the plugin. It's not going to leak any information about what you have installed, your code, how it's configured. All of this stuff is completely offline. So it's basically running that entirely within the Docker image. This Docker image isn't connecting to the internet to do anything. It's just looking at the code itself and running this same inspection profile that I showed you before. So it's running this inspection profile, but basically as a command line tool, using Docker and using some scripting to make it available, and then giving you the output of that inspection in the console. So I'll stop there if there's any questions.
Not a question, an observation. That is freaky. And sometimes things that are freaky and cool, there's a difference between what should work and what will work. Does this actually work? Is this actually a viable way for people to CI some things that are done in PyCharm?
So yeah, so this is actually something you clued me up to, because someone asked the question and you said, oh, there's a command line utility for PyCharm called inspection, like inspection profiles. And I was like, okay, but that you need to have PyCharm installed, and like, how do you get PyCharm installed? So PyCharm is easy to install on a Linux environment. Docker is Linux, basically. So it's just a case of getting a Linux image bundled with PyCharm down to a sensible size. Is this production ready? I mean, this is basically going to run PyCharm inspection profiles and give you the output in the console. I've bundled in a particular inspection profile that only shows issues from my plugin. You can actually, as a command line argument, give it any inspection profile. So if you want to go and that's why I showed you how the export worked earlier. If you wanted to go and tick everything, or you wanted to go and run this against, the Django inspections that are built into PyCharm, and you go and export this XML file, you can actually use that from the Docker image, and it will give you the output in the console as well. So you can basically run any PyCharm inspection on any code base. Another thing as well is that the code base doesn't have to be a PyCharm project. So if it can't find the idea directory, for example, then it will basically create a temporary project and scan it anyway. So it doesn't give you as much context. So for example, if you import a particular library and you alias that in the import statement, it might not give the full inspections that you get inside PyCharm, because it doesn't know where that package came from or how it works. So it doesn't give it the same rich level if you do it that way. But if it does find the idea project, it will initialize that properly and give you the full inspection.
Okay. Wow. On to the last question. What is Wiley? And oh no, we just got another question. What is Wiley, and what is its relation to this plugin?
Oh, it's a side project for me, and it has nothing to do with this plugin.
Right.
I just wanted to demo some Python
But,
code
but
without showing flaws in someone
Wiley
else's
came
code.
first, and you intended to use Wiley until you realize you don't need to use Python to parse the AST because PyCharm has done that for you.
Oh, yeah. So I was originally looking at a tool called Bandit.
Oh, Bandit. Sorry. Yes.
So yeah, Wiley is my own application. It looks at code complexity. It's a command line tool for code complexity. I was just picking on that because I've got a copy locally, and I just wanted to show that. But yeah, there's another tool called Bandit, which is a command line tool. And I was originally looking at integrating Bandit into PyCharm, but discovered it was better to write it natively.
Right. Yeah, regarding Wiley, maybe that idea of code complexity will appear in a PyCharm plugin near you in the future, right?
Maybe.
Or maybe you can get someone else to coach someone else to do it. Okay, another question, is it possible to disable specific checks inside the code itself with the suppress inspection comment?
Yes, absolutely.
Right.
So if I go and do this again. If you click on the light bulb, the inspection window will give you a whole range of options. You can suppress for the function, the statement, the file. Yeah, you can pick and choose. If you can disable it completely, or if you go to edit, you can actually, it's a shortcut to that code inspection window. So if I suppress for that statement, it will add a comment saying no inspection, which means that when you check it in and you pull it out later, that that'll apply to everyone who's using this plugin. Same for the functions. If you do it any broader, like the file, for example, it goes into the project settings. But
all right, that was our last question. If you want to go ahead and switch into wrap up.
Okay, cool. So the final thing I wanted to show is that you can, if you go to GitHub, you will see this available on GitHub. You'll also see this pop up here that says use this GitHub action with your project. If you go to view on Marketplace, you'll see the plugin on the GitHub Marketplace, and you can do use latest version, and you can copy this code here. And I've checked in the code for the webinar, this horribly insecure Django application that I've been building, and I'm using GitHub Actions as my CI/CD. And inside GitHub Actions, basically I can go and run a set of tasks. One other thing you can do is you can go and copy that code that just gave you, and you can paste it into here and save. You can check it in, commit and push, and that will go to GitHub. And what happens in GitHub is it will basically run the inspections in GitHub Actions, and it will give you insights. It will basically give you the code insights within GitHub. Yep.
All right, is that the wrap up?
That's it.
All right, great. I will switch back over to me. Thanks a lot, Anthony, for taking the time to talk with us about Python security. That was wonderfully done. You covered a lot of ideas that need to be covered. And I got to give you kudos on the plugin. Bringing these kinds of detections and fixes within reach of civilians is a subtle challenge. And people who choose to use your plugin really have no excuse when it's an alt-enter away, right?
Yeah, exactly. Thanks.
That's the goal, at least. And you're going to be at PyCon also, right?
Yes, I'll be at PyCon US, and I'm giving a talk.
Right. So PyCon US giving it. What are you talking on, by the way? Which did you choose?
Performance. Why is Python so slow? That's the headline of my talk.
So if you have an interest in this topic or anything about his plugin, go find Anthony at the, where will you be hanging out? The Real Python booth, or just at your talk?
I'll be around. Yeah, I'll be around.
Easy to find. If any of you have any questions after this, please don't hesitate to reach out to us by email or social media. If you'd like to get more information on PyCharm, please go to our website at jetbrains.com/PyCharm. We'd love your feedback on this webinar, so please feel free to contact us on Twitter or in the after webinar survey. We look at the survey. Please fill in the survey. Give us some suggestions on what we can do better, any kind of feedback you can give. The recording will be made available on our YouTube channel soon. If you haven't already, check out our blog, the PyCharm blog, where you can find up-to-date PyCharm news about releases and events. We're cooking through the EAP, the beta cycle, so lots of information coming out about that, in addition to other educational resources. So for example, the recording of this webinar will be published there probably the beginning of next week. We'll also provide some additional links and information from the presentation on the blog. That's all from us today. Thank you, Anthony, for joining us. Thanks, everyone. Hope you have a nice day.